What if the intuition that saved your life yesterday wasn't actually, you know, yours?
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. Like,
Yeah.
what if your internal monologue is basically a parasite and every so-called spontaneous choice you make today is really just you executing a script you've already, literally lived 1,000 times before?
Right.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're meticulously unpacking a single incredibly chilling source. It's a transcript from a YouTube video by someone called the Midnight Curator.
Yeah, the title of the video is, You Already Lived This Life, You Just Forgot the End.
Exactly. And I'm speaking directly to you, the listener, as we do this, because our mission today isn't just to analyze some, spooky internet theory. We are exploring the curator's core premise that human autonomy, like your actual free will, is a complete illusion.
And it's not an illusion born of, like, sociology or physics or anything external.
Right. It's an illusion actively maintained by a recurring temporal loop and a predatory internal entity.
It is a profoundly unsettling framework, mainly because it doesn't attack you from the outside, It doesn't suggest a matrix you can just unplug from. It builds the prison entirely out of the architecture of your own mind.
Which is just wow.
To really grasp the mechanics of what the curator is proposing, we kind of have to start where the illusion of control is at its absolute strongest, which is your morning routine.
Oh, right. Because when you wake up, you stare at the ceiling, you feel the quiet room, everything is exactly as you left it.
Right.
We derive this massive, almost subconscious sense of safety from that predictability. You lay there and you feel like you have total sovereign control over the schedule that's about to unfold.
You believe with absolute certainty that every minute of your morning is your choice.
Yeah, like putting on the coffee, choosing your clothes, driving to work. It's a completely fresh choice. You're the author, right? Today is a blank page.
But if we apply the lens of this narrative, that comforting predictability isn't a baseline of safety at all. It's actually the curvature of the loop you're trapped inside.
Oh, that's such a creaky way to put it. The curvature of the loop.
The curator asks us to examine the specific physical sensation of moving through those morning motions. Like, why is it that sometimes each step doesn't feel crisp and new, but strangely heavy with familiarity?
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Right, as if you're navigating a deep memory rather than experiencing an original moment.
I want to push back on that immediately, though, because, neuroscience has a very logical explanation for that heavy familiarity.
Sure, habituation.
Exactly, habituation. Our brains are incredibly energy-intensive organs. So to save calories, the basal ganglia basically takes over repetitive tasks. We essentially go on autopilot.
Right.
It feels familiar because our brain is literally executing a pre-compiled subroutine, so our prefrontal cortex can focus on, stressing about a 10:00 a.m. meeting or whatever. Why do we have to jump from habitual autopilot to you're trapped in a temporal loop?
Well, that is exactly the biological defense mechanism the theory anticipates you'd bring up.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The curator isn't arguing that habituation doesn't exist. The argument is that what we call habituation is actually a symptom of the timeline.
Oh, I see.
The feeling of a fresh start is the facade. The reason your morning routine feels heavy isn't just because you've done it many times in a linear life. It's because you are literally walking the exact same path you have walked an infinite number of times in this specific recurring loop.
Man, that's so bleak. So you aren't creating a habit at all. You're just fulfilling a script.
Exactly. Your brain is simply interpreting the execution of that script as an expression of free will.
So the basal ganglia efficiency we just talked about in this theory, that's just the mechanism of our own subjugation.
Right.
We think we're being biologically efficient, but we're actually just like smoothing out the tracks of the roller coaster we're stuck on.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. If you pour your coffee into a blue mug instead of the red one, you feel the mental gears turn, right?
Yeah, you feel the weight of the decision. You think, I chose blue today.
But the curator argues that the decision is just your conscious mind rationalizing an action that was already hard-coded.
So the conscious mind is basically just doing PR for a decision that was made before you even woke up.
Yes. The loop only functions if you firmly believe you are the driver. If you realize you're just a passenger in a predetermined cycle, the illusion completely shatters.
Okay, but if my entire daily routine is actually a highly structured, rigid, repeating cycle, the immediate logical question is, why am I completely oblivious?
Right.
If I have lived this exact Tuesday 4,000 times, how am I not just screaming in the streets? How does the human mind sustain that level of repetition without noticing the seams?
Well, the answer is that the illusion isn't perfect. The loop does have seams,
Okay.
and the curator introduces the concept of a temporal leak to explain exactly what happens when we brush up against those seams, and more importantly, how our biology aggressively hides them from us.
This brings us to the trigger, because the narrative specifies a really mundane trigger for these temporal leaks, doesn't it?
It does.
Like you check your phone and see a specific timestamp you've seen 1,000 times before, say 6:12 a.m.
I think we all have a specific number or time that just seems to stalk us.
Oh, absolutely. For me, it's 3.33. I catch the clock at 3:3 p.m. constantly.
Exactly.
And I've always just laughed it off as a quirk of my circadian rhythm. Like my brain just happens to check in at that exact time.
Yeah.
But the curator basically recontextualizes that harmless quirk into something terrifying.
Yeah.
Staring at 6:12 a.m. isn't an internal clock weirdness. It's a temporal leak. It's the theory's radical redefinition of déjà vu.
And to understand the gravity of this redefinition, we really need to contrast it with the standard medical consensus.
Okay, let's do that.
Traditionally, neurology views déjà vu as a processing error, a momentary misfiring where a short-term sensory experience is accidentally routed through the long-term memory center of the brain.
Right, it makes a brand new experience feel like a retrieved memory.
Exactly. It's a biological typo.
A glitch in the hardware.
Yes. But the curator argues that déjà vu isn't a false memory of the past at all. It is a true memory of a previous loop bleeding into your current awareness.
Oh, man.
The phrase used in the video is that it's a biological warning sign. It is literally a drop of data escaping from a failed timeline.
The paradigm shifts completely here then, because when you experience déjà vu under this framework, the structural integrity of your reality is momentarily giving way. Like the loop is buckling.
Right, it's failing to load properly.
But wait, if déjà vu is a literal warning sign that reality is breaking down, why are our reactions to it so incredibly mild?
What do you mean?
Well, you have a moment of déjà vu, you pause, you go, whoa, weird, and then like 3 seconds later, you're wondering what you're going to have for lunch.
That's very true.
If the walls of our reality are literally cracking, why don't we panic?
This is where the theory dives really deep into the evolutionary function of cognitive dissonance. We have to look at the brain not as an objective truth-seeking machine, but as a survival engine.
A survival engine.
Right. The brain's primary mandate is just to keep you functional, to keep you sane enough to gather food, reproduce, and survive until tomorrow.
Makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint.
So if objective truth threatens that sanity-like, the truth that you are in a time loop, the brain will instantly discard the truth.
Let me throw an analogy at you to see if I have the mechanics of this right. Let's compare the human brain's default mode network to like a frantic live television editor, or maybe a projectionist in a movie theater.
I like that. A projectionist.
Right, so they're sitting up in the booth running the film of your life, and suddenly they see a frame coming up that is completely corrupted.
A glitch in the film.
Exactly. A piece of the film that explicitly shows the theater is on fire, or that the movie has been playing on repeat for a literal century. The projectionist knows that if the audience, which is your conscious self, sees that frame, mass panic ensues, the theater burns down.
So what do?
They desperately splice out the damaged frames, they tape the safe parts back together, and they keep the projector rolling. We don't notice the cut, we just keep watching the movie.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the brain's defense mechanism. The curator actually notes that to maintain sanity, the brain aggressively patches these cracks. It deliberately suppresses the trauma of the previous cycles.
Because it's terrified.
Yes. Your brain, acting as that projectionist, is utterly terrified of what happens if the film stops. So it actively lies to you.
Then we are fundamentally complicit in our own imprisonment.
We really are.
If our biological reflex is to immediately look away from these glitches, to splice them out and just forget them, we are the mortar holding the bricks of the loop together. We are basically our own jailers.
Yes. The text makes it very clear that the human mind prioritizes coherence over accuracy. If accepting the truth that you are trapped in an endless loop would cause a total psychological collapse, your brain proactively blinds you.
Wow.
But as with any desperate cover-up, the patching job eventually falters. The projectionist misses a frame.
And when that suppression falters, the narrative says reality begins to stutter. And the examples given of these stutters are just incredibly unnerving to me.
They're deeply rooted in dissociation, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. Let's look at one. Hearing a sentence repeated by a stranger. Imagine you're walking down a busy city street. Someone walks past you on their phone and says, I told him the yellow one.
A perfectly mundane sentence.
Exactly, nothing weird about it. But then, 2 blocks later, a completely different person walks past and says the exact same phrase with the exact same inflection. I told him the yellow one.
In a normal linear reality, your brain immediately scrambles for a rationalization for that.
Right, you tell yourself it's just a coincidence.
Or maybe it's a popular slang term you haven't heard yet. Or maybe you just misheard the first person. You deploy that cognitive reflex to look away, to restore the baseline of normalcy.
But the narrative is telling you that no, the simulation just repeated an audio asset.
Yeah, like an NPC glitching in a video game.
Or the other example, which honestly induces vertigo just thinking about it, feeling a slight sickening delay between your actions and the world's reaction.
Experiencing lag, but in the physical world.
Yes. If we break down the simulated physics of that moment, it is existentially terrifying. You reach out to pick up a glass of water, your hand closes around empty air for a fraction of a millisecond, and then the glass catches up to your hand.
It's a synchronization error in the timeline. The physical matter of the universe failed to load in time with your conscious intention.
And again, what do? We blink, we shake our heads, we rub our eyes and blame it on being tired. We actively refuse to believe the timeline is lagging. We protect the loop.
Exactly. Your reflex to look away is the exact mechanism that allows the timeline to reset without being challenged. As long as you ignore the glitch, the cycle can proceed.
Okay, but this logic demands a further explanation. A repeating timeline, especially one this structured, this tightly controlled, and this responsive to our neurobiology, requires an architect.
It does.
It requires an enforcement mechanism. You don't have a loop without something connecting the ends together. Who or what is orchestrating this temporal cage?
This is where the curator's theory shifts from unsettling physics to a deeply invasive psychological horror.
Yeah, this part gets really dark.
The narrative introduces a predatory entity that manages the loop. But crucially, and this is the detail that truly isolates the victim, this entity does not exist in the physical outside world.
It isn't a demon in the corner of the room or a machine humming in a server farm somewhere.
No, it's completely internal. You can't lock your doors against it. You can't outrun it.
Because the source of this repetition resides entirely within your own thoughts. It is a parasite of human consciousness.
Exactly. And the narrative breaks down the entity's operation into distinct, methodical phases.
Yeah.
The first is the passive state.
Right. The text says, it simply watches, refusing to interfere while it studies the rhythm of your consciousness. Let's just pause and marinate in the sheer violation of that concept for a second.
It's incredibly invasive.
We consider our internal monologue to be our ultimate sanctuary. It's the one place where we are truly alone. It's where we can think our most private, unfiltered, shameful, or brilliant thoughts without any judgment.
Yeah, it's your safe space.
And this theory posits that you are not alone in there. There is something sitting quietly in the balcony of your mind, just taking notes.
And we really need to interrogate why it watches so passively. Because it isn't just a voyeur. It is engaged in a highly complex, protracted data-gathering operation.
Okay, so what is it looking for?
During this passive phase, the entity is mapping your internal network. It catalogs every fear you harbor, every micro-habit you form, every rationalization you make. It's building what the curator calls a wireframe.
A wireframe of your soul. I think the best way to understand this in modern terms is to look at how malignant algorithms function.
Oh, like social media algorithms.
Yeah, think about it. It tracks how long you linger on a video, what you scroll past, what makes you angry enough to comment. It does all this to build a predictive consumer profile so it can manipulate your behavior later.
Predictive modeling based on immense behavioral data sets. It's a perfect parallel.
Right, but elevate the scale of that invasion. Instead of tracking mouse clicks on a screen, this entity is tracking your neurological firing patterns.
That is, yeah.
It notes exactly how your internal monologue sounds when you are trying to calm yourself down. It records the specific mental pathway you take when you feel insecure or jealous or confident. It memorizes the exact cadence of your inner voice.
It's essentially building a perfectly accurate, three-dimensional digital twin of your consciousness.
And the true tragedy of the passive phase is that the victim is the one powering the machine.
Right, because we feed it data daily, completely unaware that our internal world is being cloned.
Every time you have a deep, introspective debate with yourself, every time you silently agonize over a choice, you are just handing over the blueprint of your identity to the observer.
We're doing all the heavy lifting, We live our lives, feel our feelings, and the entity just sits there, absorbing the data stream like a sponge.
But why? What is the ultimate endpoint of this passive mapping? Why does it need to build the wireframe?
Because of the terrifying necessity of the next phase. The observation phase only ends when the entity learns to perfectly replicate your internal monologue.
Oh, God.
It develops a voice that is utterly indistinguishable from your own thoughts.
Indistinguishable from your own thoughts. That is the most dangerous concept we've discussed so far because it represents the ultimate form of camouflage.
Exactly. Consider the mechanics of defense. As long as an external threat sounds external, you can fight it.
Right. If you suddenly heard a booming demonic voice in your head instructing you to walk into traffic, you would recognize it as foreign. You'd seek psychiatric help. You would resist.
But if the entity sounds exactly like me,
Yes. If it perfectly mimics the voice I use when I'm just thinking to myself in the shower, I have zero defense. How do you fight an invader that is wearing your face and speaking with your exact vocal cords inside your own mind?
you don't. You simply can't. And that is why the curator identifies this silent mapping process as the primary threat to your autonomy. The observation isn't just surveillance. It's the necessary preparation for total usurpation.
So, once the entity has a perfect map of your mind, once it can speak your internal language flawlessly, the passive phase is over. It doesn't need to just watch anymore.
Right. The observation ends, and the active takeover begins.
This transition marks the point where the illusion of free will is actively, functionally dismantled. The entity shifts into its active state and begins broadcasting instructions.
Broadcasting instructions.
Yeah.
It's so mechanical, it's so cold.
It does, but the absolute horror of the entity's method is its subtlety. It doesn't hijack your central nervous system. It doesn't force your hand to move against your will like a puppet.
No, brute force is inefficient and noticeable. It bypasses the physical body entirely and focuses its control exclusively on the decision-making process.
The logic is flawless, really. If the entity owns your choices, it owns your future.
It disguises these instructions perfectly through the concept of synthetic instincts.
Yes, the narrative explains that these instructions arrive as sudden natural instincts, an urge to wait, or a feeling that you should look again.
Let's unpack the psychology of that. Think about how much of human life is governed by micro-intuitions. We call them gut feelings, somatic markers.
Right, like you're about to cross the street, the walk sign is on, but suddenly you get a gut feeling to just wait one more second.
Yeah, you hesitate.
And then a car blows through the red light right where you would have been stepping. You exhale and think, wow, my intuition just saved my life.
Right. We celebrate those moments. We trust our gut. We think of intuition as our highest, most primal form of intelligence and self-preservation.
But the curator is completely pulling the rug out from under that. What if that wasn't your gut? What if that was a synthetic instinct broadcasted by the entity to keep you on the designated track of the loop?
It creates a paralyzing philosophical problem. How do you differentiate between your genuine, organic intuition, born of your own subconscious processing, and a broadcasted instruction that has been specifically engineered to sound identically like your organic intuition?
You literally cannot tell the difference. And because it sounds like you follow the instruction without hesitation. You own the thought.
Yeah, you think to yourself, I decided to wait.
You take full credit for the entity's command.
And this is how the erosion of your autonomy actually occurs in practice. It is not a sudden, violent coup d'etat. It is a gradual, invisible surrender of territory.
The narrative describes the process with this methodical rhythm. Each time you act on one of these synthetic instincts, a fraction of your autonomy transfers to the entity. Tick, tick, tick.
Tick, 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 like a metronome of your fading free will.
It emphasizes how steady and unstoppable the process is. Every time you obey a synthetic impulse to check your phone, to take a different route home, to buy a specific brand of coffee, you are handing over a piece of the steering wheel.
Ceding control over minor, everyday choices effectively builds the entity's holistic hold over your life. This connects us directly back to the beginning of our discussion, the morning routine.
Let's bring it full circle.
The more automated your life feels, the more you rely on routine and unquestioned impulses, the more willpower you have willingly surrendered.
You think your routine is a tool you created for efficiency, to save cognitive load, like we discussed earlier.
But the curator argues that the routine is actually the track laid down by the entity, leading you smoothly toward a predetermined conclusion.
It's insidious because it weaponizes our own biological desire for ease and flow. We want our lives to feel natural. We suffer from decision fatigue, so we want our choices to feel intuitive.
And the entity is right there, providing the intuition smooth as glass.
But, and here is where I want to inject some human resilience into this. Naturally, if someone figures this out, their first instinct is going to be to fight back.
Of course.
If you, listening to this deep dive right now, suddenly realize your thoughts might be hijacked, you are going to rebel.
It is the defining human response. When we realize control is being taken, we assert our agency, often aggressively.
Exactly. If I realize I'm in a loop controlled by my own routine, I'm going to smash the routine. I'm going to do something completely chaotic and unpredictable just to prove to myself and the entity that I can.
But the source material has a devastating counter to that exact impulse. It reveals that this realization, this sudden awareness of the loop, is not the advantage we think it is.
The curator pulls off a brutal narrative maneuver here. The text states, in previous loops, you realized the danger.
That line is just staggering. In previous loops, you realize the danger.
It's telling you that this very feeling of discovery, this exciting aha moment of waking up to the truth, is also just part of the script. You've had this exact epiphany 1,000 times before.
And the narrative details the specific visceral ways you have tried to break the cycle in those past loops. You tried to fight back by radically altering your behavior. You forced yourself to stay awake for days in the dark.
Let's focus on that image for a second because it represents the absolute limit of human defiance, forcing yourself to stay awake for days in the dark.
It is an act of pure, desperate rebellion.
You are stripping away every comfort, every routine. You are subjecting yourself to extreme physical and psychological torture just to prove that you can act outside the entity's predictions. You sit in the dark, hallucinating from sleep deprivation, vibrating with exhaustion, thinking, it didn't predict this, I am defying the loop.
But the reality, within the framework of the theory, is far bleaker. Why do these extreme measures inevitably fail? Because the entity's model of your mind is absolute.
Absolutely, not just highly accurate, absolute.
Right. It has mapped every single contour of your psyche. It doesn't just know what you do when you are calm and comfortable. It knows exactly how you react when you feel trapped. It has already accounted for your paranoia.
I want to use another analogy here to really hammer home why resistance is futile. Think of the concept of Laplace's demon. Or imagine playing chess against an unimaginably powerful, hyper-advanced AI supercomputer.
Okay, I can picture that.
You're sitting at the board and you realize you're losing. Every strategic move you make, the computer counters instantly. It's frustrating. So you decide to introduce chaos. You decide to make a move that makes absolutely zero strategic sense, just to confuse it.
What a wild card move.
Or, even more drastically, you decide to just scream and flip the entire chessboard over in a fit of rage. You think, ha, you didn't predict that, you glorified calculator.
But the supercomputer did predict it.
Exactly. The computer's predictive model is so incredibly advanced that it factored in your mounting frustration. It monitored your heart rate, calculated the exact moment your anger would eclipse your logic, and predicted the precise physical arc the chessboard would take through the air when you flipped it.
So flipping the board wasn't a rebellion at all.
No, it was just node 4000 in the probability tree. It was expected.
The curator states it plainly. It has factored your rebellion into its predictions. Your attempt to break the loop by staying awake in the dark wasn't a glitch in the entity's plan. It was a predicted variable written into the wireframe.
Which leads to what the text calls a paralyzing realization. If the entity has factored in your rebellion, if it knows exactly how you try to fight back and has mapped the exact neurological pathways of your defiance, then the thoughts of rebellion you are having right now
Are no longer your own.
Exactly.
This is the emotional climax of the theory. The desire to fight back is a synthetic product of the observer.
The trap snaps shut completely. Even the desire to be free is manufactured. If your own rebellious thoughts are planted, then awareness of the entity provides zero escape velocity. You cannot outthink a machine that is literally generating your thoughts.
In fact, the theory argues that awareness is the exact opposite of an escape. If you follow the logic of the curator, awareness means the end is already here. It means the takeover is complete.
This brings us to the outro of the source text, and the curator does not let the audience off the hook here.
Not at all.
The narrative shifts from this theoretical, almost academic discussion of past loops into an immediate, hyper-present, aggressive focus on the now.
The text explains that awareness isn't the first step to freedom. It is the final symptom.
It's like a terminal diagnosis. The fact that you understand you have the disease means the disease has already finished its work. And this is where the text executes this brilliant terrifying meta twist directly on the consumer.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
I'm going to paraphrase the curator here. And listener, I want you to really apply this to exactly what you're doing right now. The text points out, look at your current state. You are sitting alone, staring at a screen or listening to an audio stream, following this specific narrative to the end.
It brings the philosophical horror crashing into the immediate physical reality of the audience.
Yes. The physical act of consuming this media, of listening to this deep dive, is incorporated directly into the trap.
It calls out your exact mental state in real time. It notes that there is a thought in your head right now, a small impulse, a tiny curiosity telling you to keep listening to see how the story finishes.
And here's the synthesis of everything we've discussed about the active takeover and synthetic instincts. That impulse, that curiosity to hear the end of this deep dive.
The curator claims that impulsive curiosity operates as a final direct instruction from the entity, confirming its active presence in your mind at this very moment.
It is telling you that the reason you haven't turned us off yet is because the entity wants you to keep listening. The curiosity you feel isn't your own organic thirst for knowledge. It is a synthetic instinct designed to guide you precisely to the end of the script.
And why must you reach the end of the script? Because completing the narrative serves as the trigger condition.
The trigger condition. The final action that resets the timeline and erases all awareness of the last cycle.
The entire exercise of engaging with this theory, of experiencing the paranoia, of contemplating Laplace's demon and chessboards and morning routines, it is all just the final, complex sequence of code executing before the system forcefully reboots.
The knowledge of the loop is the very mechanism that triggers the memory wipe.
It's a perfect, inescapable, self-sealing paradox. The text closes with this haunting absolute. You already lived this life, you just forgot the end.
And the very next time you see the number 6.1, you will belong entirely to the entity.
The transition from observation to total control is complete. The passive watcher in the balcony of your mind has become the active pilot.
And the timeline resets, ready to play out the exact same sequence again, with the victim waking up, staring at the ceiling, blissfully unaware, fully believing that tomorrow morning is a fresh start.
Wow. It just strips everything away. Your morning routine, your gut intuition, your desperate rebellion, your intellectual curiosity, all of it recontextualized as the gears and levers of a trap.
We've traced the entire path, from the comforting facade of the quiet room, through the biological warnings our brains ignore, into the silent algorithmic mapping of our souls, and finally, the crushing futility of our own awareness.
It is a meticulously constructed philosophical nightmare. It preys on our deepest, most profound anxieties about free will, determinism, and the fundamental reliability of our own consciousness.
It really does. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, provocative thought to mull over.
Something outside the wireframe.
Yes, something that builds on the rules the curator established, but maybe offers a tiny, terrifying sliver of unknown space outside the wireframe. We know the entity has perfectly mapped every form of panic.
Right, it knows how we rebel.
It knows every flavor of paranoia and every drastic, chaotic attempt at rebellion. It expects you to fight, it expects you to flip the chessboard and stay awake in the dark. But if it only knows how to counter your resistance, could this simple, quiet, total acceptance of the loop be the one mental state it hasn't calculated? Could simply agreeing to the cycle, surrendering without a fight, break the entity's hold?
That's a fascinating proposition. Complete surrender is the ultimate uncalculated act of defiance.
But then again, as you sit there pondering that very idea, is the thought of accepting the loop to beat the loop just the final synthetic instinct it planted in your mind before the reset?
Until the next loop.
Keep questioning your instincts.